Everything in the universe is connected through invisible forces that hold reality together. Gravity binds galaxies, electromagnetism holds atoms, and quantum interactions define the smallest scales. But imagine a moment when these connections begin to weaken, not instantly, but gradually, as if reality itself is losing its ability to stay linked. This is where everything starts to disconnect, and the universe begins to drift into isolation and irreversible separation. At the largest scale, galaxies are connected by gravity, forming clusters and massive structures across space. If this connection weakens, galaxies would no longer remain bound together. They would slowly drift apart, each moving into its own isolated region of space. Over time, the universe would no longer look like a web of structure, but a scattered collection of distant systems, each disconnected from the others forever in expanding emptiness. As this process continues, even galaxies themselves begin to lose internal structure. Stars that once orbited stable centers would slowly break free. Without strong gravitational bonds, they would drift away from their galaxies, moving into the vast emptiness of space. The concept of a galaxy would dissolve, replaced by scattered stars floating alone, no longer connected to any larger system or gravitational order. Planetary systems would not survive this disconnection either. Planets that once orbited stars in stable paths would begin to lose their trajectories. Gravity would weaken its hold, and planets would drift away into deep space. Worlds that once depended on their stars for light and energy would become isolated, wandering endlessly in darkness, disconnected from the systems that once defined their existence. As the weakening of connections moves to smaller scales, molecules begin to break apart. The bonds that hold atoms together rely on electromagnetic forces. If those forces weaken, chemical structures would collapse. Matter itself would begin to lose its form, no longer able to maintain complex arrangements. Everything that once had structure would begin to dissolve into simpler, disconnected components. Eventually, even atoms could fail to remain stable. The attraction between electrons and nuclei might weaken, causing atoms to lose their structure entirely. Matter would no longer exist as we know it. Instead of solid forms, there would be only scattered particles, drifting independently through space, no longer connected by stable interactions or recognizable patterns. At the deepest level, the forces that govern particles could begin to fail. Without strong interactions, particles would lose their ability to influence one another. They would move through space without forming any stable relationships, existing as completely isolated units. The universe would lose its ability to create structure at any scale, from galaxies down to the smallest components of matter. Time itself becomes affected when interactions disappear. Without events or changes, time loses its meaning. The passage of time is measured through motion and interaction, but in a disconnected universe, these processes fade away. The universe would not stop, but it would become frozen in a state where nothing meaningful happens, and nothing evolves. Light would continue to travel, but without anything to interact with. It becomes meaningless. Photons would move endlessly through space, never being absorbed or reflected. The universe would become invisible in a sense, because nothing would exist to observe or interact with light. Illumination itself would lose purpose in a completely disconnected reality. Black holes might be among the last objects to maintain some form of connection. Their immense gravity could hold matter together longer than other structures, but even they are not permanent. Over vast timescales, they would evaporate through Hawking radiation, slowly losing mass until they disappear completely, removing one of the final connections in the universe. 11 Once black holes vanish, the universe approaches near total isolation. Only particles and low-energy radiation remain, drifting through an ever-expanding void. Distances between them become so vast that interactions become nearly impossible. Each particle exists alone, unable to influence anything else in any meaningful way. At this stage, the universe is no longer a system, but a collection of disconnected elements. There are no structures, no forces effectively linking components, and no processes driving change. It becomes a state of extreme simplicity, where complexity has completely vanished, replaced by isolation at every level of existence. Some theories suggest that even particles may not last forever. Over extremely long periods, they could decay into simpler forms of energy. If this happens, the universe would lose even its most basic components, leaving behind only faint traces of energy spread across infinite space. Quantum fluctuations might still occur in this empty universe, briefly creating particles from energy. However, these events would be rare and temporary. They would not rebuild structure or restore connection. Instead, they would appear and disappear instantly, leaving no lasting impact on the disconnected state of reality. This process does not end with a dramatic event. There is no explosion or final collapse. Instead, the universe quietly loses connection step by step. Everything that once interacted, influenced, and formed structure becomes isolated, unable to reconnect or rebuild what was lost. What happens when everything starts to disconnect is not destruction, but separation. A universe where nothing touches anything else, where no force binds, and no interaction occurs. It is the ultimate isolation, where reality continues to exist, but without connection, without structure, and without meaning as we understand it.